Just about every night of the week, thousands of bags filled with garbage are set out on the Philadelphia sidewalks ready for the next morning's trash day. And from dusk until dawn, somewhere in the city, there's a smorgasbord. A fifth of the trash that goes from Philadelphia to the landfill is food. I mean, are you even from Philly if you haven't seen the remains of a clawed open plastic trash bag from one of the city's opportunists? The rats, mice, raccoons, opossums, pigeons, and in some parts even fox or coyotes? Food scraps in our trash is not only leading to bigger wildlife issues, dirtier streets, and climate change, but it's also simply a colossal waste of what is becoming a more rare substance than you may realize. This is Gritty and Green, a podcast for truly urban gardening. I'm Meredith Nutting, your host and friendly neighborhood master gardener. Today we are talking once again about soil, why it's at risk, and what you can do about it. We'll hear from one of the city's composting advocates, and we'll answer some of your gardening questions. So let's get growing. 95% of the food we eat relies on topsoil. That's the nutrient-rich layer of minerals mixed with organic matter that holds in water, oxygen, and as many as 50,000 species of microorganisms. It's where our produce and our livestock's fodder takes root. You may think that soil is the most abundant resource on the planet, but it only makes up 7.5% of the Earth's surface, and it's in danger. We are losing about a soccer field's worth of soil every 5 seconds due to erosion. And it's estimated that 90% of the soil on planet Earth could be degraded by 2050. But what does that even mean, and how is it happening? Well, naturally over time, soil degrades. The minerals that give it structure break down, and the organic matter that gives it life slowly disappears. There's a whole bunch of ways that soil can, over time, stop supporting life. But of course, people are making it worse. Most simply, there's climate change that is drying out the ground at unprecedented rates, turning fertile areas into deserts. There's pollution that kills the microbial life that cycles nutrients through the soil. Human-induced deforestation literally paves the way for erosion, simply washing the soil away, leaving only the bedrock beneath. And then there's the intensive monoculture farming. Growing food this way requires a lot of fertilizers and pesticides that kill off the vital microorganisms that make topsoil what it is. And over-irrigating the soil leads to important minerals like salts just being washed away. You may think, who cares? We just spent last week talking about how we can grow plants in water. Let's just do that. But healthy soil is vital to a healthy planet. Soil provides a place for plant life, both the plants we eat, but also the forests and savannas native to our lands. Without soil, we're at risk of desertification, and we've actually experienced that in the United States. Back in the late 1800s, when settlers were moving into the Great Plains, they brought with them their farming practices from the humid climate of the East. Even though the grasslands were obviously prone to dry periods, heavy rains had the people believing that drought wasn't a problem. And land development companies actually deceived the new farmers with promises that the rain follows the plow, pushing the superstition that if you cultivate the land, you'll permanently change the climate to be more suitable for farming. These settlers dug up about 5 million acres of deep-rooted grasses that previously trapped the topsoil and water and kept the Great Plains alive during times of drought. In the early 1900s, there was a revolution in farm equipment. It was a game changer, but also very expensive. Then, on Black Monday, October 28, 1929, the Wall Street market crashed, and with it, the crop prices plummeted. To make ends meet and pay for that newly purchased equipment, farmers had to cultivate more and more suboptimal farmland to plant more crops in effort to turn a profit. Unfortunately, this eroded the soil more and caused the nutrients to leach. The crops planted there were weak and even more susceptible to drought. And then, the perfect storm. 4 droughts covered the Great Plains for nearly a decade. the crops died, the topsoil dried out completely and turned into a light powder that would hold no life. The decade-long drought affected 100 million acres from the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles to New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas, but it impacted the entire country.
Wind and dust storms scourged the heart of the nation. Millions of tons of sand and grit darkened the sky and smothered countless farms. Cattle were starving by the thousands.
This was the
stark
Dust Bowl,
tragedy for the
named for the
beleaguered farmers
massive
of the
clouds
region.
of dust that would blow high into the air. One of these storms in 1934 was 1,500 miles long and 600 miles wide. It dumped 12 million pounds of a dusty topsoil onto the city of Chicago before continuing east. And the most famous was Black Sunday on April 14th in 1935. It turned a bright sunny day into a horrible blackness.
We looked in the north and thought it was a blue norther coming. Such a huge black cloud, just looked like smoke out of a train stack or something.
We've done lots of damage to small buildings, blowed them completely away and tore the roofs off of the larger buildings. Some of them blowed the windows out of the houses. Turned cars over and things like that, a straight wind, no twister to it. And the dust was so thick that you could see nothing at all. Just absolutely couldn't see through it at all. Just dark as it could possibly be.
We was all afraid and we ran into the storm house. And we just choked and smothered. Sometimes a real bad one would last for a half a day. Sometimes it would be a week before we would see the sun. It was just darkened.
16 million acres of agricultural land was affected, and about 3.5 million people left the Plains states, mostly for California. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, started in response to the Great Depression after the market crashed in 1929, put some policies in place that also helped the struggling farmers. The Civilian Conservation Corps, established to create jobs, planted 220 million trees as part of the Great Plains Shelter Belt in efforts to hold in the soil and moisture and stop the wind from just sweeping across the barren landscape. Then in 1935, Congress declared soil erosion a national menace and established the Soil Erosion Service in the Department of the Interior, which was later then moved to the USDA and renamed the Natural Resources Conservation Service to mark its expanded mission. 40,000 farmers signed on to receive incentives to use soil conservation techniques on their farms. Today, larger farms using the best soil conservation practices has prevented another Dust Bowl. Just because it isn't blackening our skies doesn't mean our soil is safe. The Union of Concerned Scientists reported in 2020 that the U.S. cropland loses at least twice the amount of topsoil that was lost at the peak of the Great Depression. And because it takes the Earth so long to create topsoil, up to 1,000 years for a single inch deep layer, we can't take it for granted. So what should we be doing and what can we do at home? Well, big scale, farmers need to be using soil conservation techniques. This includes not tilling the land and reducing the amounts of pesticides and fertilizers. This means crop rotation and choosing disease-resistant varieties. It means planting cover crops to nourish the soil after the cash crops are harvested. And it means planting our agricultural crops alongside other species to create biological systems that help the soil. Obviously, being in the city, these solutions seem irrelevant, but we actually make choices with our dollars every day. And purchasing produce from local farms that focus on repairing the land is a great way to support our valuable topsoil. Then, of course, there's the soil you put in your garden and containers. If you're planting in the city, there's a very good chance that at some point you're going to have to bring in soil. Even if you have a little plot of open dirt, most likely, that soil is sticky clay void of life and not suitable to plant in. It could even be toxic depending on what that open little plot used to be. So you'll want to at the very least amend it, but probably add a thick layer of good gardening soil or create a raised bed and totally fill it up. You can buy soil at a big box store or a garden supply, but it's a little tricky to know what's in it and whether or not it's what you want to be putting in your garden. The first thing you'll notice when shopping around for soil is that there seems to be a million different types. Garden soil, potting soil, container soil, raised bed soil, cactus soil, orchid soil. The important thing to know is that all of these soils have the same 3 main types of ingredients, but are just in different ratios. They have something that holds moisture, something that holds air, and something that holds life. So, starting with the moisture. Most soils you buy in the store contain peat moss, which is really good at holding in the water. Peat moss comes from peat bogs, which are delicate cold wetland ecosystems where organic matter, particularly sphagnum moss, very, very slowly decomposes without oxygen. Most of the peat moss in the United States is dug up from Canadian peat bogs. It is, to say the least, not a very sustainable product. I would advise staying away from anything containing peat moss. Nowadays, coconut coir, sawdust, rice husk, and leaf molds are all good substitutes for peat moss. And all of these things help hold in moisture. Then there's the things that hold in air. Without a little breathing room, your plant's roots won't be able to take in water, and your plants will eventually die. Perlite, vermiculite, sand, and biochar are all materials that help create pockets of air and provide your soil with drainage so the water isn't just sitting around. Finally, you want life, or at least the nutrients that will help feed the life. If you buy soil at a big box store, many times it contains fertilizer. These are types of chemical fertilizers created in a lab that, used on large scale, are hurting our soils and ecosystems. The thing is, we don't need it. We have other naturally occurring fertilizers. Compost, manure, and worm castings are all great sources of nutrients. And if you look at the ingredients of the soil in the stores, you can actually find some that list these natural fertilizers. So you can avoid chemicals and turn something that could be wasted, like food scraps, into something tremendously valuable. And that takes us back to our trash bags full of food scraps and a conversation I had with Dave Blofman from Circle Compost.
I worked actually for a total of 21 years for a small business in Philly that was involved in textile recycling. While I was there, I got really involved with a group called the Secondary Materials and Recycled Textiles Association. The acronym is SMART. And the mission of that organization is to prevent textiles from going to landfills. I was at one of their regional conferences, and a speaker was on stage, and they put a pie chart up of landfill composition. Textiles on this pie chart only make up about 5% at the time of landfill composition in the U.S.
Currently, about 11 billion metric tons of textile waste ends up in the U.S. landfills. That's up over 800% since the 1960s, thank you to the ever increasingly popular fast fashion.
But food scraps were around 30% of landfill composition. So that was really an eye-opening image for me, seeing that on this pie chart. So I came home from the conference, started speaking with my wife, Michelle, about, kind of what can we do here?
Michelle, who had a lengthy career as a food scientist, was on a parental break to stay home with their 2 young daughters at the time.
We just started talking about, well, hey, what can we do about this situation? We know that these food scraps can be composted.
Both Dave and Michelle grew up with mothers who composted in their backyards.
So my mom just had a very simple system. I think that what she uses, I think it's called an earth tub, but it's really just a big upside down trash can with a bunch of slits in it to allow air to go through. Growing up around it, it was just always there. I didn't think much of it. Once my wife and I got together, we started composting right away together once we started living together.
So after thinking about it and doing a little research, they came up with a business plan and finally launched Circle Compost in 2016.
When we launched, we really didn't know what to expect. We weren't the only company composting in Philadelphia at that time.
Tim Bennett had started Bennett Compost in 2009 with a similar model. Residents and businesses subscribed for their food scraps to be picked up weekly. But in the scrappy world of urban composting, there's enough room in the pile for everyone.
we just thought, hey, we'll give this a shot, and maybe we only end up with 50 to 100 customers or something. When we started, we had a relatively small bike trailer, and thought, hey, this would be a great way to get some extra exercise, do something cool, and just kind of see what happens. When we launched with just one household and one coffee shop. We've done a very, very minimal amount of paid advertising over the years, so the business has grown through word of mouth. And today we've got around 2,200 households and only around 50 commercial accounts. We've been in business for 8 years, and overall it's been incredible. It's inspiring. It kind of keeps us motivated.
One key to their success is providing options for all sorts of household needs.
For a long time, we only provided a 5-gallon bucket. As of January 1st of this year, we launched a smaller bucket as well. So we offer a 2-gallon bucket or a 5-gallon bucket, and we have a lot of options because we figure we just want people to get started with composting, and if they feel that they only are going to fill a 2-gallon bucket every other week for whatever reason, maybe they travel a lot or don't cook a lot at home, but they make coffee every morning. Well, we'll take those coffee grounds. We've tried to create as many options for people as possible, and we try to keep it at least have some options that are an affordable price point for people, so that people can get started with composting in the city.
It's a pretty easy business concept. All you need are customers with food scraps, some empty buckets, and a way to pick it all up. Oh, and a place to put all those food scraps for months and months so they can turn into compost.
The thing that kind of slowed us down a little bit from launching right away when we had the idea was we needed a place to do the composting. So initially, we were very fortunate to partner with Novik Urban Farm, and they agreed to let us do some composting there to make compost for the farm, and that's how we got our start.
The educational farm was started in 2012 by Gary Novik. It provided nutritional and agricultural programming for students, as well as growing produce fueled by the nutrients from the compost created by Circle's food scrap collections. The farm eventually moved to Fort Mifflin on the Delaware, where it is now, but in between, Circle Compost's operation was growing.
And we had a couple of other community garden partners where we were doing all of the composting ourselves. And that's relatively easy to do when you have a small amount of material that you're dealing with. All of it was by pitchforks and shovels, no heavy equipment. Nowadays, we have 2 main farm partners where we bring all of the materials that we pick up.
One is Linvilla Orchard, a 300-acre family farm in Media, PA, about a 30-minute drive southwest of Philadelphia. They have a pick-your-own orchard, hay rides, themed attractions, seasonal events, and even a swim club.
Thankfully, they're just an amazing organization, and they don't run the composting piles themselves there. There's a company called Kitchen Harvest, run by a man named Chris Peretti, who's just an amazing person and runs an incredible operation there. There's a permanent composting facility.
If you've been to Linvilla, you probably haven't seen the compost piles. They're not front and center, but kind of hidden to the side of the orchards.
A lot of the material goes there, and then we have another farm partner we work with as well. And both of those places, they have hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment where they can make the material into compost in a much more efficient and less labor intensive process than we can.
But efficiency comes at a cost.
I think a lot of times people look at our business and they think oh wow, that must be really profitable business because you charge to pick up the food scraps and then you sell finished compost. But in reality, we're paying a tipping fee to have the composting done, and then we're also paying to have the finished compost provided back to us that we then bag up and give back for free to our food scrap customers and also sell. So that's not to say that it's not a good business to be in, but we focus on being cash flow positive. We do very, very much want to have our own permanent composting site that we manage. It's really, really hard. Forgetting about having enough land that would even qualify to apply for a composting permit in the city. Even just finding a place to base a business like this in the city is not easy. We're now renting space where we have one space we rent where we park our trucks, and then we have another space that we rent where we keep it's kind of our bike hub. We keep our bike trailers, our e-assist bikes. So, finding locations like that, a place to park trucks that, even though we clean them and wash them and all that, they're still stinky trucks going in and out, so to speak, and a place to have a bike hub where you can, effectively start and end bike routes.
And let's talk about those bike routes, because even though Circle Compost has upgraded to e-assist bikes, it's tough work picking up all those sometimes stinky food scraps year-round.
It's hard physical labor. I'm glad that I still love the biking. I did a bike route this morning. I think it was 65 stops. I'm slower than our other bike person, but I kind of enjoy just really taking my time with them. I think it took me, all in all, a little over 3 hours to do the 65 stops. In terms of mileage, I think it was around 10 miles, something like that. Yeah.
So the work can be hard, and it's not making anyone rich. So why do it?
There are so many benefits to composting, and there are so many problems with not composting. Okay, so first of all, let's just look at landfills and how landfills work, right? Landfills get filled up, right? Whether food scraps are going into people's trash and they're just going in the landfill along with whatever else people throw away, plastic waste, metal, whatever else that ends up in the landfill, right? The landfill fills up, and what do you do when a landfill fills up, right? They have to, the companies running these landfills, they have to find more land to create another landfill.
There are about 3,000 active landfills in the United States, each averaging 600 acres. In the U.S., up to 1.8 million acres of habitat has been lost to landfills.
So that right there, that's unsustainable right there. Like, you're just going to nobody's making any more land, so we're just going to keep finding more existing land to turn into a landfill.
And these landfills don't just contain harmless trash. They often contain hazardous materials and emit toxic gases. For example, a study in New York found that families living within a mile of a hazardous waste landfill have a 12% higher chance of birthing a child with congenital malformations. And another study found that exposure to landfill emissions was linked to respiratory diseases, including fatal lung cancers.
And then when food scraps are part of the mix going into these landfills, they don't break down, right? And they emit methane gas, which, different studies will show different levels of harm, but I've seen studies showing up to 80 times, methane emissions being up to 80 times more harmful for our environment than carbon dioxide emissions.
When it comes to methane emissions, landfills come in third behind natural gas system and cow burps. The methane is created when food scraps, buried in plastic bags and underneath piles and piles of garbage, break down anaerobically. That's without oxygen. Yes, they will eventually become a kind of compost slurry, but methane gas is a huge byproduct. In 2022, the amount of methane coming out of landfills was about the same as the amount of methane produced by more than 24 million gas-powered cars driven for a year.
So it's worse than, what a car is emitting on the road. So now let's take a look at the alternative, the composting process, right?
Unlike food scraps in landfills, the food scraps that get composted properly break down with oxygen under aerobic conditions. Food scraps breaking down in a compost pile don't emit as much methane, and there are other environmental benefits to composting.
It still amazes me, 8 years into running this business, how material goes to the composting site, it gets made into compost, and then the compost gets used on the farm or provided back to our customers or sold as well. And then we keep going back to that same composting site, the same location, the same ground, the same land. We don't have to continue searching for more land that we're gonna fill up with something and then maybe have some cover crop on top, but you move on. We keep going back to the same composting location. So when we add a composting location, we're creating a site that can be used over and over and over again to break down food scraps and other organic materials into finished compost. while those compost piles are cooking, they're also absorbing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So not only are we now we're not releasing methane, which is extremely harmful for our environment, but we're absorbing carbon dioxide out of the air. It can be used actually for carbon sequestration.
Carbon sequestration is when the carbon that would be floating around in the atmosphere is instead held in life or in the ground or even underwater. When carbon is drawn out of the air and into the compost, it stays there. It's then applied to gardens and farmland where it increases the carbon in the soil by, one study showed, 40%. Carbon sequestration is just one tool in our climate change fighting tool belt. And composting seems like an easy way to do that.
So benefits there as well. And then finally, when we compost properly, we make this beautiful soil amendment that is finished compost that can then be used to grow healthy fruits and vegetables. Healthy plants can be used and spread on street trees here in the city. We create something useful in this beautiful closed loop that can be done on a hyperlocal level.
And hyperlocal also means in your own home. Personally, I have 3 home composting systems. The first system I got was a worm bin in my South Philly apartment. Then I moved to a house with outdoor space and I got a tumbler and eventually an in-ground composter. Each of these has pros and cons and I use all of them. But still, none of them can take animal products, and in the winter, they slow down a lot. So I also subscribe to a composting pickup.
Doing it on a small scale at your home, yeah, it's an amazing thing to do. It involves the least transportation of material, but it doesn't just automatically happen. You have to create the right habits and be disciplined about doing it right. You gotta have the right carbon-based materials to add to your compost pile. You gotta keep your ratios correct. And then, you've gotta make sure the compost pile is getting air. You gotta make sure it's getting water. So to break down things like, meat or bones, shells, things like that, you need a lot of microbial activity. You need large, relatively mature compost piles to break that stuff down. And that stuff's absolutely gonna attract vermin. So we take all of those things because the compost piles that we're feeding can eat all of that.
So we have home composting and private composting services, but where does the city fit into all of this?
When you start a business like ours on the household side, you kind of know going in that there's always a chance that the municipality itself will launch some kind of a composting program, which, could lead potentially to your business being obsolete. Of course, it could also lead to opportunities. If the city ends up launching a composting program, I pray that it's done right. It's not something you can force on people, and that's my opinion. I mean, we love our customers, our household customers. They care enough to pay for a service like ours, and we still get, our share of contamination. I mean, it's not a high percentage, but, if you just were to tell every household in Philadelphia by mandate that they have to compost, you're gonna get such a massive amount of contamination that it's all gonna end up going to landfill anyway. So effectively, you would spend a lot of taxpayer money to create a program, potentially eliminate multiple private businesses that are already doing this with some success, and put it all in landfill anyway. So that would be a nightmare. My personal opinion, if the city were to do something, would be to make it an opt-in program. I would love to see funding for that. Of course, selfishly, I'd love to see the city outsource the pickups to potentially a company like ours or other companies that are out there. I do very, very much want composting to be accessible to all people. Just want to see it done right. Just think, right, about what we're throwing away, right? Every single thing, everything that goes into our trash cans, if we view those materials as a resource, think about where it can go and what it can become. Food scraps out of anything, it's kind of like the most obvious waste we generate that can clearly become a resource. Like it's not trash. This is not something meant to go into a landfill with a bunch of plastic waste and other, quote unquote trash. we know about this problem, and we know that there's, a relatively simple solution. I mean, composting, it's relatively low-hanging fruit when you talk about sustainability, but we have the education. We know that that's a good thing to do. So there's also a major just educational gap here that needs to be filled, and it's something, and that's something that we're also very dedicated and passionate about. My advice would be just give it a try and see how this changes your home's waste management habits. We've had so many customers over the years who have tried it. Whatever put them over the edge to finally give it a try, that could vary, but they then come back and say, they can't believe how little trash they generate. And it's a huge, huge difference to our planet.
That was Dave Blovman from Circle Compost. You can find out more about their mission and how to become a subscriber by visiting circlecompost.com. Dave and Michelle also started a nonprofit to help families below the poverty line afford composting. To help with their cause, visit circlechange.co. Okay, now time for some of your gardening questions. One I get often from gardeners all over the city is, what do you do about the squirrels? They're cute, they've got fuzzy little tails, but they are every gardener's nemesis. Gray squirrels are often blamed for digging up plants, chomping at tomatoes, and just general chaos in the garden. Every gardener, everywhere, has some sort of menace that they are dealing with. We coexist on this planet. It's inevitable. In some places, it's skunks digging up lawns looking for grubs. In others, it's gophers eating every vegetable in sight. In a lot of the suburbs, it's white-tailed deer eating everything down to the ground. In Philadelphia, we have a few garden menaces. During the day, we have squirrels, birds, and cats. And at night, we have raccoons, opossums, and cats. Back in my 20s and 30s, I worked out in the field as a wildlife filmmaker, and I sat side by side a lot of wildlife conservationists, trappers, and trackers. One of the biggest things I learned from these folks about filming animals was how to observe. The second biggest thing I learned is that the behaviors of an animal in my yard may be completely different than the ones in your yard. Now, I've spent a lot of time observing what goes on in my garden, and I've learned a lot about the squirrels, particularly the ones that visit my yard. Gray squirrels are native to the eastern United States, but they weren't really popular in cities until they were purposefully reintroduced into the urban environment, starting with our very own Franklin Square in 1847. And now there are a lot. They did very well here. Gray squirrels are diurnal hoarders. That means they're out during the day and they're looking for stuff to stash. That's why they're constantly rooting around in our garden beds. In my garden, I particularly notice their activity when I've just planted something new. Typically, it looks like someone has snuck into my garden, pulled everything I just planted up, thrown it aside in the dirt, and just left. Knowing a thing or two about squirrels, I suspect that seeing the disturbed earth, a foraging squirrel may be looking for a nut or an acorn that was stashed by another squirrel. It's easier to steal another squirrel's cache than create your own. There's no way to get rid of the squirrels. It's not happening, so I don't even bother with that fight. But every morning for a few days after I plant a new seedling, I go out and I check on them. I replant them, I give them a good watering. And you know what? After all of the squirrels in the area get to check out the newly disturbed dirt and find there's nothing there for them, they leave. I rarely have other squirrel problems. Now, this may not be the particular problem you are having with the squirrels in your yard, but coming up with the solution may require the same kind of observance, creativity, and trial and error. And there's some other methods you can try, like spraying or planting things with scents squirrels don't like. You can try mint, marigold, and mustard, to name a few. Planting these aromatic plants between the plants you want to protect, like tomatoes, could keep the squirrels away. You can also create barriers, like mulch to keep them out of the soil or row covers to keep them off the tops of your plants. You can also provide squirrels with what they're looking for: food and water. Giving them a distraction of seeds away from your plants may be enough. Though we may not have big enough spaces in Philly to put squirrel food away from our gardens. But a lot of times animals are going after plants because they are thirsty. Providing a shallow bowl of water could keep them away from your tomatoes. These are just a few suggestions to keep squirrels at bay, but the one that I find to work the best is a trusty dog that gets a thrill from chasing a squirrel. I hope this helps you bond with your local squirrels instead of cursing the damage they've done. And if you have a garden question of your own, you can write or send me a voice memo at grittyandgreen@coolgoonproductions.com. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the dirty world of soil, and a very special thanks to Dave Blovman from Circle Compost. If you want to learn more about Circle Compost, check out their website, circlecompost.com. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode of Gritty and Green, and don't forget to tune into Gritty and Green by the Moon to learn how to garden by the phases of the moon. Gritty and Green is presented by Green Philly, in collaboration with Cool Goon Productions. It was written, directed, and edited by me, Meredith Nutting. Theme music by Kazuya. If you want more information about local sustainability, go to greenphl.com.